My life felt as close to perfect as one could hope. Emily and I had been married for 10 years, and in that time, we had built a life that most would envy. We had two wonderful children, 7-year-old Ethan and 5-year-old Sophie, and Emily was now expecting our third child, a baby girl. We lived in a beautiful suburban home, with a spacious backyard where the kids would play and a garden that Emily lovingly tended. On the surface, everything was going well. Emily had never worked during our marriage. She chose to stay home and focus on raising the kids. It was an arrangement that worked for us, as my job as a financial analyst provided enough to support our family comfortably. She was actively involved in social circles and frequently organized playdates, attended charity events, and managed various social engagements. But her real passion seemed to be social media. Emily would spend hours online, scrolling through feeds, posting updates, and connecting with old friends. I never minded it much. Everyone had hobbies, and this was hers. Then, the signs began, subtle at first. It started with her talking about an old friend she had reconnected with on social media, someone she hadn't seen since high school. I didn't think much of it initially. She mentioned him casually, in the way someone would mention an old classmate. His name was Daniel, her high school boyfriend. She would laugh about the good old days and reminisce about silly things they had done as teenagers. I never sensed anything sinister. In fact, it felt harmless, almost nostalgic. But then, I noticed she started bringing him up more frequently. Little remarks here and there. Daniel sent me the funniest meme today. Or, Daniel was such a goofball in high school. You wouldn't believe it. It wasn't the content of what she said that bothered me, but the frequency. There was a subtle shift in her tone whenever she mentioned him, a lightness in her voice that felt different. At first, I brushed it off as my own paranoia. She was pregnant. Maybe she was just feeling sentimental, looking back at her youth as she prepared to welcome another child. Still, a nagging feeling remained. I tried to ignore it, but I found myself paying more attention to Emily's behavior. Her mood seemed to fluctuate more than usual, and she was becoming increasingly glued to her phone. When I would walk into the room, she would quickly put it down, sometimes even locking the screen abruptly. I told myself that it was probably just my imagination. Her trips into the city became more frequent. She always had a reason: errands, meeting friends, shopping for the new baby. "I just need a break," she would say, and I would nod in agreement. After all, she was handling a lot with 2 kids and a third on the way. It seemed fair that she would need time for herself. But as time went on, I began to notice a pattern. Her errands almost always fell on the same days, and she would return home late, sometimes with an odd excuse like meeting traffic or running into an old friend. She'd appear slightly disheveled, yet with makeup that seemed too perfect for just running around doing chores. I remember one instance when she came home late and posted a photo on social media later that evening. It was a picture taken inside a stylish, modern house, a place I didn't recognize. She captioned it with something vague like, "Enjoying a little me time." I asked her about it casually, and she said it was a friend's place. No big deal. I didn't press her further. After all, what did I have to worry about? We had a happy marriage, didn't we? The feeling that something wasn't right kept gnawing at me, but I tried my best to ignore it. We were expecting another child soon, and the last thing I wanted was to create unnecessary tension. Yet, the subtle changes continued. Her phone was now always by her side, even when she slept. She turned off the notifications and put her device on silent mode, which she claimed was to avoid being disturbed by the buzzing when she was resting. Her laughter became more private, muffled giggles while staring at her phone screen, then a sudden shift in her demeanor when I entered the room. The most striking change, however, was in her attitude towards me. There was a certain distance that hadn't existed before. While she was still affectionate, it felt forced, almost mechanical. We used to share everything, but now it seemed like she was withholding parts of her life. When I asked her about her day, she would gloss over the details or change the subject. It was as if the connection that had once been effortless now required conscious effort on her part. As the days passed, I couldn't shake the feeling that something deeper was amiss. The pattern was too consistent to be a coincidence: her trips to the city, the late returns, the strange secrecy surrounding her phone. The realization hit me like a slow wave. She had reconnected with Daniel for more than just casual reminiscing. Yet, I found myself rationalizing her actions. She was just reconnecting with an old friend, I thought. I didn't want to face the possibility that there could be more to it. Looking back, I wonder if a part of me knew all along. The signs were there, each one a tiny crack in the foundation of the life we had built together. But I had chosen to look away, to cling to the belief that we still had that perfect life we had worked so hard for. Little did I know, our seemingly perfect life was about to unravel. The turning point came on a Thursday, one of those days when Emily would typically head into the city. She had mentioned needing to shop for some baby essentials and catch up with a friend. I didn't think much of it until that evening when she returned later than expected, looking unusually put together for someone who had been running errands all day. Her makeup was immaculate, her hair freshly styled, and she wore a new dress that I hadn't seen before. When I casually asked about her day, she seemed distracted, her responses short and vague. A knot tightened in my stomach, and for the first time, I couldn't brush off the sense that something was wrong. Over the next few days, I began paying closer attention to the little things. Emily's phone, once left carelessly on the kitchen counter, was now constantly by her side, even during dinner. She took to answering calls in another room, often keeping her voice low or speaking in hushed tones. If I asked who she was talking to, she would brush it off as just one of her friends. It was nothing out of the ordinary, she'd say, but the more I observed, the more I noticed her eyes flickering with a hint of nervousness whenever I asked. One evening, as Emily prepared to head out to the city again, a thought crossed my mind. I glanced at the calendar and realized that her trips had become regular, almost like clockwork. Every Tuesday and Thursday, without fail, she would have some errand that required her to be away for hours. It was too consistent to be mere coincidence. That realization set off a whirlwind of doubts. Was she really going shopping or meeting friends, or was something else going on? I decided to follow her the next time she went out. It felt wrong, like I was invading her privacy, but I needed answers. The following Tuesday, I left work early and waited near our house in my car. Emily emerged from the front door right on schedule, looking like she was going to an event rather than running mundane errands. She got into her car and drove off, and I followed at a discreet distance. Her route took her out of the familiar streets of our neighborhood and into the city. As I drove behind her, my heart pounded with every turn. I told myself that I was being paranoid, that I would find her at some department store or cafe with a friend, and I'd have to confront my own insecurity. But then she turned into a quiet residential neighborhood, definitely not a shopping district. I watched as she pulled into the driveway of a sleek, modern house. From my parked car down the street, I saw her walk to the front door, where a man stood waiting. He looked familiar, and then it hit me it was Daniel, Emily's high school sweetheart. They exchanged a few words before he stepped aside, letting her inside. As the door closed behind them, I felt a surge of cold realization. My suspicions were no longer baseless, they were rooted in reality. I drove away, my mind racing with a million questions and no answers. Over the next few days, I struggled to act normal around Emily. I didn't want to confront her without solid proof, but it was hard to keep my emotions in check. I tried to drop subtle hints to see if she would reveal anything, casual questions about her trips to the city, asking her to tell me more about Daniel. She stayed consistent with her stories, never showing any signs of guilt or hesitation. If anything, she seemed to be getting more comfortable in her deception, like she had rehearsed the lies. I decided to search for answers in a different way by going through her phone. One night, after she had fallen asleep, I gently took her phone from the nightstand. Her phone was password protected, but I knew the code. My hands shook as I unlocked it, half hoping to find nothing, half fearing what I might discover. The messages confirmed what I had dreaded. There, buried in the text threads, were conversations between her and Daniel. They weren't explicit, but the language was far too familiar for just old friends. They reminisced about high school, joked about sneaking around like teenagers, and even discussed their plans to meet up. It was clear that these weren't innocent catch-ups, they were dates. I felt a wave of nausea as I realized how deep this betrayal ran. It wasn't just the messages, there were photos too. Pictures of them at various places in the city smiling, laughing, looking like a couple. There was even a photo that Emily had posted on social media, taken from inside that same modern house. She had made it seem like she was alone, enjoying a quiet afternoon, when in reality, Daniel was just outside the frame. The duplicity was staggering. With every new piece of evidence, the knot in my chest tightened. Emily wasn't just rekindling an old friendship, she was living a double life. And all the while, she had been coming home to me, acting like everything was fine, playing the role of the devoted wife and mother. The weight of the betrayal crushed down on me, making it difficult to breathe. I couldn't confront her just yet. I needed to be sure, absolutely sure. I decided to hire a private investigator to follow Emily on her next few trips. If she was going to Daniel's house, I needed proof that would leave no room for denial. The suspicions that had taken root in my mind were no longer just doubts, they were a path leading toward a painful truth that I wasn't prepared to face, but one I could no longer ignore. The decision to hire a private investigator was not an easy one. I felt a deep sense of guilt and shame for resorting to such measures, but I needed undeniable proof of Emily's betrayal before confronting her. I couldn't shake the image of her walking into Daniel's house, a place she had no business being. It was now more than just suspicion. Something was truly wrong, and I was determined to uncover the truth. The investigator, Tom, was experienced and understood the delicate nature of my situation. We agreed that he would tail Emily discreetly for the next few weeks, especially on those regular trips into the city. He would document where she went, whom she saw, and anything else of interest. I had to swallow my pride and accept that I was about to invade my wife's privacy in a way I never thought I would. Days passed slowly as I waited for updates. At home, I tried to act as normally as I could. I made small talk, helped the kids with their homework, and even played along when Emily suggested we plan a baby moon getaway before our third child arrived. I felt sick to my stomach every time she looked at me with those familiar eyes, the same eyes that now hid secrets. It was the hardest act I'd ever had to put on, but I wasn't ready to show my cards just yet. A week later, Tom sent me an email with the first set of findings. I hesitated before opening it, my heart pounding so hard it felt like it might burst out of my chest. The report was clear. Emily had visited Daniel's house multiple times over the past week, and Tom had taken pictures of them together. They weren't doing anything overtly incriminating in the photos, but the body language spoke volumes: close conversations, lingering looks, and that all too familiar ease with each other that suggested something much deeper than friendship. It wasn't just casual visits either. Emily had spent several hours at Daniel's house each time, and on one occasion, she didn't return home until late in the evening. I recalled her excuse that day, something about running into a friend and getting caught up in conversation. The picture Tom had taken showed her leaving Daniel's house, not a cafe as she had claimed. Still, as damning as these photos were, there was nothing that definitively proved an affair. I needed more, and I was afraid of what that more might look like. Tom continued his surveillance over the next couple of weeks, and the pattern remained consistent. Emily's visits to Daniel's house became even more frequent, and the private investigator managed to capture a video of them leaving together late at night, walking close to each other in a way that spoke of intimacy. The turning point came on a Thursday, exactly a month since I first noticed the changes in Emily's behavior. That afternoon, Tom called me with a tone of urgency in his voice. "You need to see this," he said. I met him later that evening, and he handed me an envelope filled with photos. These weren't like the previous ones. They told a story that no amount of denial could erase. The pictures showed Emily and Daniel at a secluded park, hidden away from the city streets. They weren't just talking. They were sitting close, sharing a blanket, laughing, and leaning into each other. One photo captured a tender moment where Daniel brushed a strand of hair from Emily's face, and she gazed at him with a look I hadn't seen in years. The image cut through me like a knife. There was no mistaking the affection in her eyes. It wasn't just physical attraction. It was emotional. She was in love. Tom had also managed to get audio recordings from that day. In the clip, Emily confessed how reconnecting with Daniel made her feel alive again, how she had missed the excitement and newness that he brought back into her life. She spoke of our marriage, admitting that while she cared for me, she felt trapped in a routine. She said it was unfair to both of us that she was only half present in our life together. Hearing those words was like a punch to the gut. It felt like she had already made up her mind about what she wanted, and it wasn't me. I couldn't bear to listen to any more. It was enough, more than enough. I thanked Tom for his work and took the evidence home. I knew I would confront Emily, but I didn't know how or when. My anger burned white-hot, but beneath it was a deep sadness, the kind that drains the life out of you. I had to keep it together for the sake of our children, at least until I had a plan. Then, something unexpected happened. Emily announced she was going into labor. It was a couple of weeks earlier than we had anticipated, and in the chaos that followed, I set aside my own turmoil to focus on her and the baby. Our daughter, Lily, arrived safely, and for a brief moment, the joy of welcoming a new life into the world overshadowed everything else. Emily was radiant, exhausted but happy, and I felt a flicker of hope. Maybe we could get past this. Maybe it was just a phase, a mistake she would regret. But that flicker was quickly extinguished when, during a routine paternity test at the hospital, I requested a DNA test for Lily without Emily's knowledge. The results came in a week later, and they confirmed my deepest fear: Lily was not my biological daughter. I was not her father. The weight of the betrayal crushed me like a tidal wave. It was not just an affair. It was a complete dismantling of our family, a betrayal that extended beyond me and into the life of an innocent child. How could she have done this? How could she have let me believe that Lily was mine, all while knowing the truth? The devastation was indescribable, but there was no longer any room for doubt or hesitation. It was time to confront Emily with everything I knew. That evening, I waited for her to put the children to bed. When she walked into the living room, I was sitting there, the envelope of evidence on the table in front of me. I looked up at her, the hurt and anger blazing in my eyes, and said, "We need to talk." When I confronted Emily that night, my voice was calm, too calm for what I was about to reveal. She sat down across from me, a look of concern spreading across her face as she saw the seriousness in my eyes. I took a deep breath and slid the envelope of evidence across the table. "What's this?" she asked, her voice trembling slightly. "Open it," I said flatly. "You'll understand soon enough." She hesitated, then picked up the envelope and pulled out the contents. Her face blanched as she shuffled through the photos of her and Daniel at his house, in the park, sharing moments of intimacy that no old friends would share. She dropped the pictures back on the table and looked at me, her eyes wide with panic. "It's not what it looks like," she started, her voice breaking. "Let me explain." I cut her off, my tone sharp. "There's nothing left to explain, Emily. I know everything. I know you've been seeing him. I know that this isn't just some old friendship." I leaned forward, my gaze boring into hers. "And I know that Lily isn't mine." Her mouth opened, but no sound came out. She looked like a deer caught in headlights, stunned by the sudden impact of my words. The silence that followed was suffocating, each second stretching into an eternity. I saw a flicker of realization in her eyes. She knew she couldn't talk her way out of this. How did you?" she stammered. "I requested a DNA test at the hospital," I replied, my voice flat and emotionless. "I needed to know for sure." The hurt was there, bubbling just beneath the surface, but I forced myself to stay composed. "The results came back last week. Lily is Daniel's daughter, isn't she?" Emily's shoulders sagged, and she buried her face in her hands, sobbing. It was the confirmation I didn't want but had anticipated. The flood of emotions I had been holding back for weeks crashed over me: anger, betrayal, devastation. I wanted to shout, to throw something, to do anything that would release the fury that burned inside me. But I stayed still, my hands clenched into fists on my lap. "Why, Emily?" I asked quietly, my voice trembling with a mix of rage and despair. "How could you do this to me? To our family?" She looked up, tears streaming down her face. I didn't mean for any of this to happen," she choked out. It started as catching up with an old friend, and then I got caught up in it. I know it sounds like an excuse, but I was just so unhappy. I felt trapped, like I was losing myself. I missed feeling alive, feeling wanted." Her voice broke again as she admitted what I had feared most. "Yes, Lily is his daughter." Her words hung in the air like a poisonous cloud, tainting everything they touched. It was as if the foundation of our life together had been shattered, leaving nothing but debris in its wake. I felt an overwhelming emptiness inside, the kind that seemed too vast to ever be filled again. "You didn't think I deserved to know?" I asked, my voice rising. "You didn't think I had the right to know that the child I've been raising, the child I've been loving, isn't mine?" The bitterness was hard to contain, and my hands trembled as I spoke. "When were you planning to tell me, Emily? Or were you just going to let me live a lie forever?" She shook her head, fresh tears spilling over. "I didn't know how to tell you. I was scared, okay? I didn't want to hurt you, and I kept convincing myself that it didn't matter, that Lily could still be ours, even if you weren't her biological father." Her words were hollow, echoing with the selfishness of her choices. "You were scared?" I said bitterly. "What about me, Emily? What about the life I've been living under false pretenses because of your decisions?" I felt the anger rising again, and I struggled to keep it in check. "You know, I could have forgiven a lot of things. But this isn't something I can just look past." Emily reached out as if to touch my hand, but I recoiled. "Please," she whispered, her voice desperate. "I never wanted to hurt you. I still love you." I shook my head slowly. "No, you don't," I replied, my voice cold. "You love the idea of keeping everything intact while still getting whatever it was you needed from him. But you never thought about what this would do to me, or to our children. This wasn't love, Emily. It was selfishness." There was nothing more to say. The truth was out in the open, and no amount of pleading could change it. We sat there in silence, the air heavy with the finality of what had been revealed. For a moment, I wondered if she realized the full extent of what she had done not just to me, but to our entire family. There was no going back from this. The betrayal ran too deep, and the damage was too profound. The next morning, I began the process of ending our marriage. Emily moved out shortly afterward, taking Lily and our other 2 children with her. We agreed on a temporary arrangement for the kids, but the discussions were tense and cold. The life we had built was in ruins, reduced to legal paperwork and bitter conversations about custody and visitation. As for Lily, the bond one thought I would have with her was shattered before it even had a chance to grow. I loved her in those early days, but now, every time I saw her, I was reminded of what had been taken from me. I didn't know if I could ever look at her the same way again, and that realization was the hardest part of all. Emily had once been the person I trusted most, the woman with whom I had built my dreams. But now, she was a stranger who had torn apart the world we had created together, all for a momentary escape with a man from her past. The days following the confrontation were filled with a numbness that seemed to settle into my bones. I had always thought of myself as a rational man, someone who could stay calm under pressure. But this was different. It was as if the ground had crumbled beneath me, and I was left stumbling through the wreckage of what had once been my life. Emily had moved out and was staying with her parents, taking the children with her. The house felt empty, too quiet, like a hollow shell of a home. We were civil, at least on the surface, but every interaction was strained. Emily insisted on talking about the children's needs, trying to establish some sense of normalcy in a situation that was anything but. We met at a cafe one morning to discuss a temporary custody arrangement, and as I watched her sip her coffee, I couldn't help but think about how everything had changed. The woman sitting across from me wasn't the same person I thought I knew. She was someone who had lied, deceived, and betrayed me in ways I never imagined possible. The legal proceedings began almost immediately. My lawyer advised me to go for joint custody of Ethan and Sophie, but the situation with Lily was more complicated. Although I had been on her birth certificate, the DNA test proved I wasn't her biological father. Legally, I had rights to contest, but emotionally, I wasn't sure where I stood. It was a painful reality having to untangle my feelings for a child I had thought was mine. How could I continue being a father to her when she was a living reminder of Emily's betrayal? Emily tried to reach out several times, saying she still wanted me in Lily's life, that she hoped we could work something out. But I couldn't bring myself to respond to her messages. It felt like any connection we had left was severed the moment I saw the DNA results. To engage with her, even for Lily's sake, felt like reopening a wound that was still fresh and bleeding. I needed time to process, to decide what role, if any, I could play in Lily's life without losing myself in the pain. The hardest part was explaining things to Ethan and Sophie. I didn't want them to think badly of their mother, so I kept it vague, saying that Mom and Dad need some time apart. I reassured them that I would always be their dad and that we would figure out a new routine together. They didn't understand why everything was changing, and honestly, I didn't either. What had once seemed like a stable, loving home had been shattered overnight, leaving us all scrambling to pick up the pieces. Amid the chaos, I found myself drifting into a dark place, a combination of anger and despair that I couldn't shake. I felt humiliated and emasculated, as if I had been made a fool by someone I trusted with my life. I hated the idea that Emily and Daniel had been laughing behind my back, building a connection while I was clueless. I needed an outlet for my anger, something to numb the ache. That's when Sophia came into the picture. She was the young, attractive neighbor who had recently moved in across the street. We'd exchanged a few friendly words in passing, but nothing more. Then, one evening, as I was sitting on my porch, she waved and came over to chat. Her kindness was a welcome distraction, and as the days went by, we found ourselves talking more often. I knew it wasn't right, that I was using her as a way to escape my own hurt, but I didn't care. I was too tired of feeling broken. Eventually, things between Sophia and me turned into more than just casual conversations. It was spontaneous, reckless even, but it felt like reclaiming some small part of myself. Emily found out about it. She always seemed to know, perhaps through the neighborhood gossip. She confronted me one afternoon, her voice trembling with a mixture of anger and hurt. "How could you do this?" she demanded. "We're supposed to be figuring things out for the kids." I met her gaze with a coldness I didn't know I was capable of. "You made your choices, Emily," I replied. "Now I'm making mine." The look in her eyes told me she hadn't expected this from me, as if she thought she still had some hold over my life. But that hold was gone, severed by her betrayal. In that moment, I realized that my path forward would have to be one that didn't include her, not as a partner, and maybe not even as a friend. The fallout was complete, and there was no going back. Sophia became more than just a distraction. She became a way for me to reclaim a sense of power and control. Our encounters were impulsive, and in many ways, they served as a form of revenge. It wasn't just about getting back at Emily for what she had done, though that was part of it. It was also about proving to myself that I could move on, that I could be desired, and that my life wasn't defined by her betrayal. Emily's reaction to Sophia was both predictable and surprisingly intense. She showed up at the house one evening, unannounced, just as Sophia was leaving. The look on Emily's face when she saw Sophia give me a brief kiss before walking away spoke volumes. For a moment, I saw a flash of something almost like regret in her eyes, but it was quickly replaced by anger. "Is this what you're doing now?" she spat, her voice shaking. "Throwing yourself at the first woman who shows you attention? Do you think that will fix anything?" I didn't bother to hide the bitterness in my reply. "I'm doing what I need to do to get past all this, Emily. You don't get to judge me. You're the one who started this mess." The confrontation escalated quickly. She accused me of trying to hurt her deliberately, of setting a bad example for the kids. I responded by reminding her that it was her choices that had torn the family apart. "You're the one who let someone else into our marriage," I said coldly. "You're the one who lied to me, who lied to all of us." The words hung in the air, and for a moment, Emily's anger seemed to deflate, leaving only sadness. We were no longer two people who could see eye to eye, let alone heal what had been broken. After that confrontation, I made it clear that our relationship would remain strictly about co-parenting, nothing more. We were both too wounded, too angry, to even attempt to be civil beyond the necessary logistics for Ethan and Sophie. I decided that moving forward, I would focus on rebuilding my life without her in it. As for Sophia, what began as a fling gradually grew into something more. She was different from Emily in almost every way, carefree, spontaneous, and unburdened by the weight of a complicated past. We started spending more time together, and what had begun as a distraction became a genuine connection. She helped me see that there was still a future ahead, one that didn't have to be defined by the pain of the past. Emily's resentment simmered as she saw Sophia become a regular presence in my life. She was polite enough when we had to interact, but there was a tension that couldn't be ignored. I knew she was struggling with the reality of seeing me with someone else, especially since her relationship with Daniel had ended soon after the truth about Lily came out. I heard through mutual friends that Daniel had distanced himself from Emily, not wanting to be caught up in the fallout of our crumbling marriage. The news of their breakup didn't bring me any satisfaction, though. If anything, it made me realize just how hollow revenge truly felt. Hurting Emily back didn't heal the wound she had inflicted, nor did it change the reality of the broken home our children now had to navigate. I began to understand that moving forward required more than just retaliation. It required letting go. I started focusing on my own growth, taking up hobbies I had neglected and reconnecting with friends I hadn't seen in years. Sophia and I continued to see each other, but I kept it casual. She knew I wasn't ready to dive into anything serious, and she respected my boundaries. We found comfort in each other's company without the pressure of labeling what we had. Meanwhile, I made an effort to strengthen my relationship with Ethan and Sophie, who were still adjusting to the changes in their lives. We established new routines, new traditions, and I did my best to provide them with a sense of stability amid the chaos. I took them camping, taught them how to ride bikes, and made time for simple things like movie nights and board games. They needed to know that I would always be there for them, no matter what had happened between their mother and me. Emily and I eventually found a way to co-parent without hostility. It wasn't easy, and there were moments when the old resentment flared up. But over time, we learned to communicate more effectively for the sake of the children. We weren't friends, and we would never be again, but we had to coexist as parents. The process of healing was long and uneven, filled with moments of progress and setbacks. There were days when the anger still bubbled up inside me, but they became fewer and farther between. I came to understand that revenge, while momentarily satisfying, was ultimately an empty pursuit. Real growth came from rebuilding my life piece by piece, without being consumed by what had been lost. In the end, I realized that Emily's betrayal didn't have to define me. It was a chapter in my life, a painful one, but it didn't have to dictate the rest of my story. I had the power to move forward, to find new happiness, and to write a new beginning for myself and my children. It was time to let the past go, not for Emily's sake, but for my own. The path forward was slow and filled with challenges, but over time, I found myself emerging from the darkness. The betrayal and heartache didn't vanish overnight, but each day felt a little lighter than the one before. I had begun to accept that my life had taken a different course, one that I hadn't planned, but one that I could still shape. My relationship with Sophia remained steady, but without the pressure of labels or long-term commitments. We enjoyed each other's company and helped each other heal, but we both knew that I needed time. Time to fully let go of the anger I still occasionally felt, time to navigate co-parenting with Emily, and time to truly find myself again. Sophia understood this, and her patience allowed me the space to move at my own pace. Co-parenting with Emily was not without its difficulties, but we managed to maintain a civil relationship for the sake of Ethan and Sophie. The children still struggled at times, asking why things had to change or why we couldn't all be together again. Those moments were the hardest, but I reassured them that both their mother and I loved them very much, even if we couldn't be a family in the traditional sense anymore. Slowly, the new routines we created began to feel normal, and our lives settled into a rhythm. The question of my role in Lily's life lingered, but ultimately, I decided to be present, even if from a distance. She was innocent in all of this, and it wasn't her fault that her arrival had come with such painful revelations. I didn't feel the same bond with her as I did with Ethan and Sophie, but I wanted her to know that I still cared. We included her in family activities when I had the kids, and over time, I found myself softening toward her. It would never be the same as it was before, but I was learning to accept that our relationship didn't have to follow a perfect path to be meaningful. Emily continued to struggle with the consequences of her actions. Her life hadn't unfolded the way she had likely hoped when she reconnected with Daniel, and now she was dealing with the fallout. I could see the guilt in her eyes whenever we exchanged the children, a guilt that spoke of lost opportunities and regret. But I didn't let myself linger on her pain. I had my own journey to focus on, my own healing to prioritize. One day, while organizing some old boxes in the garage, I came across a photo album from years ago, pictures of Emily and me in the early days of our relationship. We looked so young and happy, blissfully unaware of the trials that lay ahead. A part of me felt a pang of nostalgia, but it was quickly replaced by a sense of closure. Those memories belonged to another time, to another version of myself who didn't yet know what he was capable of surviving. I put the album away, not out of bitterness, but out of acceptance. It was a piece of my past, but it no longer dictated my future. I threw myself into new activities, joining a local hiking group, taking up woodworking, and even starting to play guitar again, something I hadn't done since college. It was refreshing to focus on personal growth, to build something for myself instead of just existing in the shadow of the past. I found joy in simple things, like the laughter of my children or the quiet satisfaction of completing a project with my hands. As the months turned into years, I began to feel something I hadn't felt in a long time: hope. The wounds left by Emily's betrayal would never fully disappear, but they were scars now, not open sores. They served as reminders of a time when my life had fallen apart and how I had managed to put it back together again, stronger and wiser than before. Moving forward didn't mean forgetting. It meant embracing the lessons learned and using them to build a life of my own design. I no longer saw myself as a victim of circumstance, but as someone who had overcome adversity. There were still uncertainties, still challenges ahead, but I faced them with a resilience I hadn't known I possessed. In the end, Emily's betrayal had forced me to grow in ways I never would have otherwise. I found new parts of myself, new strengths, and a renewed appreciation for the things that truly mattered: my children, my health, and the people who had supported me along the way. It wasn't the life I had planned, but it was mine, and I was finally ready to live it fully.